So if you noticed, we did not give a topic or a title. Jerry, I think it's here. Yeah. Good morning. Welcome back. Great to have you. Come grab a chair.
Thank you.
So we did not give a title. We did not share the name of the person whose letter we're going to read this week. That was not by accident. What I'd like to do is something a little different this week, which is I'd like to share the letter with you first, and then share with you the author of this letter.
Do you expect us
To guess?
to get?
No, I'm not expecting you to guess who it is, but I think it's an important lesson.
To have an idea.
That's right. And that is that we have a principle from the Rambam called colloquial phrasing is something along the lines of Kabelas ha'emes mimisha amaro, accept the truth from where it comes. And that's why Rav Saadia Gaon and other Rishonim quoted from all kinds of sources, even sources whose belief systems were not in consonance with traditional Torah values. But if there are principles, if there are sparks of truth, if there are nitzotzos of Kedusha that have been scattered into the world, and we can find some redemptive element there, something that we know that rings true to authentic Yiddishkeit, then we can tease it out. Reminds us of what the Rambam taught us a couple of weeks ago about Christianity, which obviously on many levels the Rambam said is a michshol and is very problematic, but on the other hand, maybe there's an element of something that we can find, a spark, a holiness that was scattered in such places. It's true for people. So I want to learn this letter, and I'm not going to say who it is. I'm already giving away that it's not necessarily somebody who you would expect it from. But I think that is a value of understanding that we need to look at the substance and not judge based on the name. It could be that something somebody wrote is completely not acceptable. And sometimes even that person becomes a chefza, a gavra, who becomes a chefza shel psul. But on the other hand, it becomes, I think, important sometimes to distinguish the person from the idea. This is easier said than done, because in recent years, we had issues like this, where you had somebody who was a charismatic Torah leader who published many teachings, who was then found out to be an unscrupulous person, who was found out to violate principles of the Torah that brought about a terrible chilul Hashem.
Does that undo everything?
So that's the question. How do we view that person's teachings, that person's chidushei Torah? So that's part of this sensitivity, that on the one hand we say, Kabelas ha'emes mimisha amaro. On the other hand, you have somebody who is exposed to being, an abuser, Rahman al-Islam. So it's not so pashut, right? There are two sides of this coin. But let's assume for a second that the person who's espousing these beliefs is a spiritual seeker. They're an authentic, good human being. They're hashkafas, their tradition, their learning, whatever. It's not the path that we would have chosen. But so I'm not trying to say that this is so pashut, and that in every case do you say, oh, it doesn't matter who wrote it. Sometimes maybe it does. But what I would like to say is that in some cases, we can take chizuk and inspiration and guidance and even just find the language to articulate an idea that's an authentic idea, not incorporating foreign ideas and foreign values, but to be able to take a traditional value and use the language of someone who may not be traditional. It's certainly something that we should think of. I'm going to give you an example of that later. Okay, that's the introduction. Part of the continuity of this letter that we're going to focus on is that it relates to last week's letter, where Rav Goren introduced to us the story from the Sefer of Ezra, where unfortunately many of the families, even the families of Kohanim, they were intermarried. And that was one of the sources that when you have an intermarried couple, if the mother is not Jewish, the wife in that couple is not Jewish, then the mother, if she is not Jewish, her children are not Jewish. So we come back in this week's letter to that same story. Here's the letter, but I'm not giving it to you because I don't want you to see who wrote it. In answering your question, B'tshuva l'mechtavo, to Mr. Ben Gurion, I'm going to pull it open also in the English so that I can read it out to you. In answer to your letter, first of all, I have to say that I do not generally involve myself in areas that are pertinent to psak halacha, practical rulings. There are many people who are more knowledgeable than I who rule on areas of psak halacha. I'm not ro'oi, I'm not worthy ladun. I'm just talking about the practical outcomes. I'm not talking about the halachic issues. He says this topic, hanidon shelafanenu, the issue that is before us, hu inyan shel hagdara. The word hagdara, lahagdir, means to define, to give parameters of, right? Exactly, like a geder, a fence. So how do you define the parameters of something? It's an inyan shel hagdara. And he says it's very difficult. Kasha ma'od, it's very difficult, lishanos, to change hagdaros, principles, definitions, hamikubalos ba'uma, that have been accepted in a nation without getting into confusion. He says the minute that you begin to question one definition, then problems arise regarding all the other definitions. So for example, he says, why does the Jewish Sabbath start in the evening?
Because you get a new day,
And not in the, but why? Why doesn't it start in the morning?
because they want to do it for the next day.
But the question is why? That's what he's saying. That's what we accept, but why? He says, why does the Jewish calendar follow the moon? Why? And other things. Harbe hagdaros kibalnu me'avosenu. We have received many definitions from our forefathers, from our forebears. These are just accepted aspects of Jewish life. Va'atzara shava shebehem, and what they have in common, sha'al yedein, that through them, nikar ofia shel ha'uma, through them we perceive the character of the Jewish nation. Jews start the day at sundown. That's what we do. We follow the lunar calendar. That's what we do. This is part of our tradition. Ha-canon shel kisvei hakodesh, the canon of holy scriptures. Mikoma shel sfas ever shalanu, the language of our past, and also the place of Israel in our orientation, in our worldview. You cannot explain it other than our historical Masorah, our tradition. This is our tradition from the time of, from time immemorial. And this is what our forefathers have bequeathed to us. He doesn't mention the word Sinai, but he's saying from the origins of our people, we focus on Israel. We have a certain language. We have a certain set of accepted principles. Af halalu, he says, even those, and this is interesting, even those who have not engaged these questions through a positive perspective on religion, even people who have not been positive as itself, have recognized what he calls ha'ason hanishkaf lanu ke'uma miyuchedes, the catastrophe that could be predicted for our nation if we began to start meddling with all of these accepted principles. What would happen to the Jewish people? everything would fall apart. As a unique nation, if we start to debate these aspects. So that's number one. It says this is Masorah, yeah.
So, to bring in, to add to that point, Dennis Prager, I think, summarized it pretty nicely.
Yeah.
He said, listen, why is Shabbat on Saturday, Friday night instead of, well, you could make it Wednesday, but then it wouldn't be Judaism.
That's right.
So if you change the rules of the game, it's a new game.
That's it. That's it. Then it's not Judaism anymore.
You're looking for trouble.
So then he says, on that point, he says, let's go even further. He says, specifically, this question of who is a Jew what makes somebody a Jew. In particular, we must be aware of introducing confusion into a definition whose history and rationale are well known. I am reading, this is the translation from the Ben Raphael. Our forefathers thought long and hard before concluding that a Jew is a person born in sanctity, that is, whose mother is a Jewess or a convert, or who is himself converted, and that the father's family is not to be taken into consideration. And then he adds that our forefathers saw no reason to be more lenient in the case of a Jewish man who married a non-Jewish woman. Just because they intermarried, there was no reason to be lenient. And then he goes back to the story of Ezra. He says, Ezra, Hikir sha'al yedei nisuim ka'ela. Ezra recognized that through this type of marriage, this intermarriage, alula ha'uma kula lehitame bein hagoyim. The nation could become completely assimilated among all the other nations. Could be the end of the distinctness of Jews. Why? Because hayeladim, the children, yischanchu, they would be educated, bi'ikar gishasam l'chayim, in their core approach to life, in their orientation, their spiritual attitudes, basic outlook and conscience would be formed by the education we received from a non-Jew, from the mother. As he writes a little bit later, that the mother is the akeres habayis, the mainstay of a home. So these children, Ezra says, are being raised by non-Jewish mothers. Velo she'ena makeres, this woman doesn't recognize, she's not Jewish. Velo kibla al atzma es hagisha hayudit, the approach of Judaism. Our sages recognized shahachinuch hamachria shel hayeled hu hanosin lo ba'udu ba'arisa lefnei sheyodea ledaber. The child's education begins before the child even knows to speak. It's absorbed through the home. Hachinuch hazeh hu mekabel lerov ubiikar me'imo. This chinuch, the child receives primarily from his mother. This mother, v'hitzricha lios omigeza amenu, either she has to be from the root of our family, of our nation, or she will have accepted it upon herself. And obviously, if she accepts it, if she is converting and embracing the tradition, she is Yehudis Gemura. Like who? Like Rus HaMoaviyah, who is the model of a convert. Amei chami ve'elokayach Elokai. Many of the letters that people sent to Ben Gurion represent this theme. They go back over and over to the concept of Rus as the convert. V'hi ru'uya, and Rus, the Moabite convert, is worthy that she should be the progenitor of kings and Jewish leaders. If this woman, this non-Jewish intermarried woman, wants to convert and accept Judaism, b'vakasha.
Who's teaching her?
She'll have to she'll get Naomi to teach her. Someone, the CRC will have a bezdin.
So these letters from the 1950s?
Yes, December 15th, 1958. You're trying to figure out who it is. I'm not saying yet. Oh, then he says, let's talk about our times. That was Ezra. Let's talk about our time. Efshar lahakir chachmaso shel Ezra. We see the wisdom of Ezra. Va'omek binaso, in the depth of his knowledge from life. He says, we see that intermarriage is on the rise. He says there are some cities here on the west coast, B'ma'arav HaMedina. All right, so I'm giving away already where this person is writing. On the west coast, where he says, Rahman al-Islan, more than half of the marriages are with non-Jewish women.
From what group?
From Jews.
No, I
Married.
understand it.
He's just talking about general. He's talking, I mean,
Where?
in general, Jews. It doesn't matter what group. We're talking about Jews who are marrying non-Jewish women. And he says, even though right away the son is called after his father's family, there is a recognition. Yesh hechreach. There is a crucial. The translation here is crucial and critical. Hechreach. Even if you're going to tell me that the father's name is Cohn or Schwartz, and the kid's last name is Cohn or Schwartz, the author of this letter says, it is crucial, yesh hechreach, it is crucial, not to disregard, not to abandon, shelo levater b'shum ofen, in any way on the halacha. In which case, according to this, we do not accept these children as Jews if they do not accept our tradition, ba'ofen mishmi hamekubal, according to the official accepted tradition. That's it. They have to know that they have a choice. Everyone has a choice in life. If you're not Jewish, you have a choice to join. You can have a choice either lihishaer bit nochrim as non-Jews, or lehisgayer, or to convert. And if they are what he calls mevakrim, if they choose and prioritize Judaism, they have to accept upon themselves mekablam aleim al atzmam chovos gedolim, great requirements, klape amasoros uklape am Yisrael, vis-a-vis the tradition, obligations to the tradition, obligations to the Jewish people. They have to opt in. Hasakona gedola kan, the great danger here, that what's going to happen, that this choice is just going to get kicked down the road. Then nobody's going to make a decision. Become Jewish, not become Jewish. They'll wait another day. You'll wait another day. And they're going to choose the easy path, he says. What's going to happen? Lios Yudim Bizchuyosehem. They want to be Jews getting the rights of being part of a Jewish community, the benefits, the perks.
How many out there?
There are lots.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we're not being massacred,
Exactly.
right? But the sense of community, the sense of honors, relationships, whatever, meaningful, there's lots of things,
No,
right? What's going to happen? They're going to just, lios yudim b'schuyosehem lehisarev, they're going to get mixed into the Jewish community, b'soch hatzibur shalanu, ulishayer lo yudim mipas chovosehem. But they're not going to be Jews vis-a-vis their responsibilities, their commitments. To really be committed to exploring and explaining Judaism. He says, you already know what I said, Mr. Ben-Gurion, when I met with you 6 years ago. I'm not going to say who it was yet, you'll see in a minute. I met with you 6 years ago when I was in Israel, that we have only one spiritual center, and that is Jerusalem. We do not have two traditions or two nations. I thus applaud you for consulting Jewish intellectuals in the diaspora in this matter, as it is clear that the decision taken in the issue at hand will have a considerable effect on the communities in the diaspora as well. There is no question that we must consider the difficulties arising from this conclusion, because the children who, unaware of the traditional approach to this issue, have regarded themselves as Jews and will be astonished to learn, guess what, that they're not Jewish. Here too, says this author, in case there are cases of this sort, I have encountered such circumstances. I was compelled to explain to the children of mixed marriages how they are regarded by Jewish tradition. And listen to what he writes from his own life experience. Kevan shenoda l'tzirim, since it was known to these children, shelafi shitas hayadus, that according to the approach of Judaism, the mother is akeres habayis b'chol inyan ruchani, is the mainstay of the home in all things spiritual, and therefore the answer to the question if they are Jews from mibeten v'leida tluyim be'emdas imam, it's all dependent on the status of their mother. Hevinu es hadavar, these young people understood this. V'nisratzu lehisgayer ba'ofen rishmi v'chadas, and they agreed to convert. Once they heard that, he says, obviously, and this is the concluding paragraph, obviously, we must treat these children, excuse me, bechiba, with love, whether they become part of the Jewish people or they're not Jews, but they're just around, we have to relate to them with love. If they come to part of the Jewish people, they're gerim, they're converts. The Torah commanded us 47 times to love the ger. Lev also beozer. And if they're not, if they decide they don't want to become gerim, they could be chasidi umas ha'olam, righteous among the nations. They could be l'chol hapachos mechachameim, from the wise among the nations. You could still give them respect. Excuse me. It says, and those two, we also need to love them. And about this, Chazal already said, in general, smol doche, the left hand gently pushes away via min mekareves, and the right hand, the stronger hand, pulls. And therefore he says, yesh lekavos, we should hope that they will recognize the value of our Torah, of our tradition. They will stick with us. They will be joining our nation, even though we don't seek out converts, we don't pursue proselytes. However, these children who are of a Jewish father, they have a connection to us. And so to fix whatever that can be fixed among the crooked of that which is broken, we should try as much as possible that they should want to convert authentically, with respect and friendship, sincerely yours.
You can't be buried in the Jewish cemetery.
If they're not Jewish, they cannot be buried in a Jewish cemetery. That's correct. That's one of the natures of the Chovos. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I apologize. Excuse me.
But they have the option of converting later.
So they have an option to convert anytime. So who is the author of this letter, which expounds so beautifully on our tradition and what is a very compelling approach to this question? The author to this letter was born in 1895. What's that?
So he's from the United States.
Yes.
He is not Rabbi Weiss, because Rabbi Weiss died in 1949. But he is on the kind of reform movement that is questioning what to do with the many.
Okay. But that was Ben Gurion's question. He was born in 1895. His father was a Rav who was a Slabotker Talmud. His father was a Rav in Cincinnati. This young man received a BA of City College in New York because they moved to New York in the early 1900s. A PhD from Columbia University in 1918. And he received smicha from the institution that he would later lead with distinction. Eliezer Halevi Finkelstein. Louis Finkelstein. Louis Finkelstein became a professor, later the vice president, then the president, then the chancellor emeritus of the Jewish Theological Seminary. He was the leader of conservative Judaism. He was on the front cover, which I could send you, but I didn't send it to you because I could leave it as a surprise. I could send it to you now. Conservative. He was the most prominent conservative rabbi. In 1951, he was on the front cover of Time magazine. 6-page cover story. You can get it online. I looked it up. And in those days, the conservative movement was the largest, and it was under his leadership. It was under his leadership that this flourished.
But he was not able to convince.
Okay, so now there's a lot to say about his legacy and what he believed and what he thought. There's a sociologist who ended up, he's not a highly regarded person because of his behavior. We go back to where we started, be careful who you quote, who apparently he wrote an article about conservative Judaism that I read, that apparently there was a shmua that Finkelstein himself, who wasn't ordained rabbi at JTS, but his personal practice was that before he would go to visit a conservative shul, he would daven at home. So that he was up gedaven before he would go there because he didn't necessarily, hold of whatever was going on over there. So I can't tell you what he held about anything else in halacha, and in life, in Jewish practice, and anything like that. Yes. So he was a professor and a rabbi and a teacher, and he was also a scholar. And when he passed away in the 90s, Lawrence Schiffman wrote a multi-page tribute to him with, describing the tremendous scholarship that he had and all of the books that he published and the articles that he wrote. But what's important to me is the idea that we can take the language and the message that he shares, even if we don't accept anything else that he has to offer.
No, for sure. But the message was good at that point in time.
Well, you could debate whether or not you agree with his approach. There's a rumor that he once said that conservative Judaism was a gimmick to get people back to Judaism, right? There's a shmua like that. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know. I never met him. I didn't read books about him. I did just a little bit of research here and there. But there's no question he built the conservative movement. And you could debate whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. Only the Rebbeinu Shalom could make that question. He's Al-Ti Dan Yechidi. He's the ultimate judge of life and history and every person. So we're not meant to sit and judge of anybody else. But all I want is...
Personally, I think the conservative movement was very good idea.
So it depends who you ask. You could say that that's
the that they made, and the one who used to say that was Rabbi Stern, who had Bnei Emunah, very strong. And he said the one mistake that in his point of view was to allow people to drive. Because once you drive, you don't have a sense of community.
Okay, and then there were others who debated that and said, you have to let them drive, otherwise they won't connect to shul, to synagogue. So you could debate, and I think many in our community would say that it was not a good decision, and that conservative movement was a bad invention, but you could debate that. My point is, that's not our job. I don't know, maybe if you have nothing else to do, and you don't have any time to learn, I don't know, but our job is to further our avodas Hashem. I do not believe that our personal avodas Hashem is going to be enhanced by debating the merits and the demerits of the conservative movement in the 1950s. Right, that's not the point. And what was. And so
There is a debate.
I know, but my point is, I'm not participating in that debate, and it doesn't interest me. Because my point is that we have a Masorah, and we need to deal with the circumstances in which we are right now. So we need to look to our tradition. We need to figure out what our Rabbeim and our Masorah say in the year 2021. Forget about, we can maybe look to the past for different lessons that happen to different groups. But to sit in judgment, I don't think that has any merit.
No, we are not sitting in judgment, but it's coming up in Israel that now the Rabbanut will have less of a say, because conservative rabbis will be able to... Okay,
good. So there are lots of questions that relate to current issues that have to do with conservative rabbis. That's no question that's true. But the idea that we should waste, in my opinion, waste time talking about whether this was a good idea or a bad idea, a good invention or a bad invention, that's not the point.
I think there is one part of the context that Al-Bahama, if the founder of that movement is saying everything you say, that on the topic of what is a Jew was very machmir, then you should give it extra weight.
Right. So that's what was so interesting to me, right? I would have expected, which is why I didn't tell you beforehand, I would have expected when I read this letter that somebody who is now in 1958, which means he is at the heyday of his leadership at the helm of the leading higher level institution that represents and churns out conservative rabbis. Now he's been there for decades. I would have expected a very broad, liberal approach to this very fundamental question. And the answer is, al tistaka b'kankan. Don't judge people by their labels and by their slogans. Don't accept them by their slogans just because somebody says they announce themselves in a certain way. But also don't judge. Don't prejudge. If I would have said, today we're going to study the response of the head of JTS in the 1950s to Ben-Gurion's question of who is a Jew, is that what you would have expected?
Yeah.
That's not what I would have expected because I didn't know. I didn't know him.
1958, yes,
Okay.
not in 1988,
Okay.
and not in 2008.
Okay. But I think it's interesting. And then, for sociologists who have other things, I guess if you get paid to talk about this, it's Kedai. But like for sociologists, they could talk about what happened between 1958 and 1988. And if the founder, would they agree, etc. That's not of interest to us. The point that I wanted to bring out today is that it could be that we might disagree with many other positions that he took. But we should look at this position and hear him out for what he has to say on this issue. And in fact, in this issue, what he has to say is deeply resonant with a traditional 100% Torah true articulation. And sometimes it is to our benefit to look to people who have the ability to explain things in ways that maybe we wouldn't have. So I'll close with this anecdote. My Rebbe, Rav Hershel Schachter, once remarked about his Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, about whom it is known was an expert in many fields well beyond Torah, including his PhD in philosophy from the University of Berlin. He taught philosophy, and he spoke using very often philosophical terms that I can't even understand. So Rav Schachter once remarked, he said that there was a newspaper article criticizing something that Rabbi Soloveitchik had said. The newspaper article was written by a conservative rabbi who said that Rabbi Soloveitchik isn't saying anything new. He's taking the same old Orthodox ideas and he's just using new philosophical terms to explain them. And Rav Schachter said, that's exactly right. That's exactly what the Rav was telling us. The Rav had a fealty, an unwavering fealty to the Masorah, to the tradition, to the halacha. And yet, he was able to take the language, the verbiage, the terminology of a secular world, of people who are sometimes not Jewish or even anti-Jewish, and use those words as vehicles to explain in a modern era our deepest truths, our Yisodos of Yahadus. So even somebody who is a conservative rabbi, if he has certain language that we can use to articulate, so we're going to be able to find ways to stay true to our tradition, not to borrow concepts from other places, but to borrow the language so that we can connect in a relevant way and speak in a compelling way about these important ideas in a modern society. That's today's takeaway from our lesson. Shkoyach. That's it. Yeah. And exactly, and how to reach them.